Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this Water Authority meeting to order of the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Water Utility Authority. Uh, Trustee Rael is excused and all members are present this evening via video conference. We will start with a silent invocation and followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. And I don't have a problem doing the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So, as posted on our website and noted on our published Water Authority agenda, this meeting is being held via video conference. The Water Authority accepted general public comment and comments on the meeting specific agenda items in written form via email through 4 p.m. today. And these comments were distributed to all board members. We will move on to item 3, which is the approval of minutes. I motion to approve the June 23rd, 2021 minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Councilor Pena. Ms. Carrion, could I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Benson.
Aye.
Counselor Davis.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Member Nair.
Yes.
Vice Chair Pena. Commissioner Piscotti.
Yes.
Chair Quesada.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to proclamations and awards. As you know, we always have really great time at the beginning of our meetings because we always have ways to celebrate the great employees at the Water Utility Authority. So this is the quarterly employee incentive awards. And so I'm just going to read them. And you know, we don't get to celebrate like we used to in person, but you know, it's still a great honor to be able to celebrate these great employees. We have Lawrence Amor, Trina Norman, Judy Pedigo, Eric Murray, Candida Kelcourse, Jose Garcia, and Angelo Martinez. They all received $50 each. Joshua Segura, Elias Ortiz, Ruben Griego, Scott Maddox, Jimmy Ryan, Manuel Griego, Eric Lopez, Larry Larison, Francisco Martinez. They all received $100 each. Robert Morajes, Justin Sample, and Floyd Pena also received $100 each and 8 hours. I don't know what you can do with 8 hours, but I would take 8 hours for sure. Melissa Toya, $50. Julie Garcia, Garrett Mays, $100 each. And then Daniel Perez and Daniel Bogue, $75 and 8 hours. Arthur Martinez, Alan Barney, Alex Lovato, Charles Pincinelli, Paul Harden, Benjamin Zimmerman, Selena Martinez, Michelle Ortiz, Linda Quintanilla, Gloria Marianes, Jessica Ortiz, Monique Lewis, and Jonathan Herrera, all $50 each. Jared Ray, Manuel Griego, Diddler Deutsch, Kenneth Leip, Scott Maddox, Angelo Ortiz, Edward Chavez, Arturo Ramirez, and Stephen Carricacos, $175 each. Paul Lucero and Randy Otero, $150 each. And Nick Romero, $100. And Dustin Westby, $50. So as you know, that's a lot of employees who got a lot of great extra benefits and they're not extra benefits. Let me say they're awards. These people work really hard, and they're rewarded for their commitment to their job and their commitment to serve the people of Bernalillo County and the city of Albuquerque. So thank you very much. You're very much appreciated. We wish we could shake your hand or give you a fist bump, but here's a virtual fist bump to all of you if you're paying attention tonight, and congratulations. Um, we will now go on to item 5, which is public comment. But as previously stated, public comment was accepted prior to the meeting and by email. But we appreciate all of your inquiries and your comments. Please don't hesitate to continue to keep sending those to us. I know my office deals with a lot of stuff when it comes to water issues, and the Water Utility Authority is very responsive to the constituents that come through my office anyway. So I'm assuming they're very responsive to everybody else's districts as well. And so we will continue to do that. So we'll move on to announcements, which is number 6, announcements and communications. The next 6A is the next scheduled meeting. Our next scheduled meeting will be held September 22nd, 2021 at 5 p.m. via video conference. Item 6B is Technical Customer Advisory Committee vaccines. There is vacancies. I'm sorry. I've been reading vaccines for weeks, and now everything looks like it's vacancies. There is a vacancy on the Technical Customer Advisory Committee. If any board members have any nominations, please direct them to the online application on the Water Authority's website, and that is www.abcwua.org. So if somebody wants to nominate somebody to sit on the Technical Customer Advisory Committee, please do that. And we thank anybody who volunteers to serve on any of our boards that we appoint people to. We know it's hard to do that, but we appreciate that. We will move on to item 7, which is the introduction, which is first reading of legislation. We'll move on to item 7A, which is R21-16, and I will hand it over to Mr. Mark Sanchez.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this resolution would amend our capital improvements program by adding $1 million for the design of a conveyance structure to serve the expansion of Intel. We anticipate that Intel will certainly reimburse us for this amount, up to $1 million, and pay for all related infrastructure to serve this expansion. They have expressed an interest in 2 wells, which are high arsenic wells, are not used for drinking water, and apparently work very well with their water purification system for their production needs. We anticipate their demand to be about 3 million gallons a day. However, they return 80% of that into our wastewater discharge. So effectively, they're using 600,000 gallons of water per day for their expansion. That would be the equivalent of half a golf course, to give you some perspective on the water use. Additionally, this would authorize us entering into a service agreement and financing agreements, if necessary in the future, to serve this demand. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Mr. Sanchez? Commissioner Benson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Sanchez, I assume this is part of their expansion, which will then increase jobs at Intel, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Benson, that's correct.
Great. Ultimately, that's really what I need to know. But do you have any idea of what what this will allow Intel to do in terms of hiring?
I don't recall the specific hiring goals, but I believe this is going to certainly restore probably around 1,000 jobs, is my understanding.
That's great news. Okay, thank you very much.
Do you have any more questions, comments? Mr. Sanchez, is there any subsidy?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, no, this service would fall under our no net expense policy. So Intel would be required to pay for all infrastructure dedicated to this service.
Okay, great. That's good news. Thank you. I don't think we have any more questions. Thank you so much. We'll move on to item 7B, which is R2117. And that we will hand over to Ms. Elizabeth Anderson.
Oops. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I have here today an introduction. This is for approving and authorizing the NMED, New Mexico Environment Department appropriation for the Bosque non-potable water reclamation plant and reuse project. This is authorizing and appropriating the capital outlay funding that we received in the amount of $410,000. And it's an introduction, so I guess I'm not seeking approval at this time, but.
No, yeah, this is all introduction.
Or I stand for any questions.
There you go. Do we have any questions, any comments? No? All right, thank you so much. That was a quick introduction. I'm pretty sure we'll go into depth when we, go into approval and have a more in-depth conversation. We'll move on to item C, which is R2118, and that is also approving and authorizing the New Mexico Environment Department appropriation for monitoring well construction. Ms. Anderson, take it over.
So similar to our last item, this is, Mr. Chair, members of the board, this is an introduction of the grant agreement that was provided by the capital outlay in the amount of $770,000. And this is to construct a monitoring well for the Kirtland Air Force Base bulk fuels facility cleanup. This is a really exciting project, and we'll be hearing more about it later in Diane Agnew's presentation. So I stand for any questions.
Do we have any questions? No? Okay. Thank you so much. We'll move on to item D, R2119, approving and authorizing the New Mexico Environment Department appropriation for the Cornwall Community Water and Wastewater System Upgrade Project. Ms. Anderson.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, this is again another capital outlay agreement, or capital outlay funding in the amount of $155,000. This will be expanding wastewater infrastructure into the Cornwall area. We anticipate this being used for design of that system. Really exciting project. So this is authorizing and the appropriation for the Cornwall wastewater. And I stand for any questions.
All right. Do we have any questions? Any comments? No? Okay. Thank you, everybody. We will move on to item E, which is R2120, approving and authorizing the New Mexico Environmental Department appropriation for the Southside Water Reclamation Plant outfall realignment project. Ms. Anderson.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, it's exciting to have this many capital outlay projects to present. So glad to be doing this. This is for the Southside Water Reclamation Plant outfall realignment project in the capital outlay in the amount of $322,500. This project is going to be creating new habitat for the silvery minnow along the area just there outside of the outfall. So and I stand for any questions.
Do we have any questions? No? Okay. Thank you so much. We'll move on to item F, R2121. This is authorizing the insurance and sale of Albuquerque Bernalillo Water Utility Authority Senior Lien Joint Water and Sewer System Improvement Revenue Bond Series 2021 in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed 90 million. To be issued in one or more series for the purpose of acquiring additional systems, assets, and extending, repairing, replacing, and improving the water authority's joint water and sewer system. And this will be presented by Eric Harrigan.
Hi, good evening, Chairman and members of the authority. Eric Harrigan with RBC Capital Markets. I have a short presentation that I'll run through and happy to answer any questions. So the proposed financing has two components. 56 million will be financed for general basic need projects, which will be financed over a 12-year period. The anticipated borrowing rate would be 1.47%. In addition, there is 30 million of projects, including interceptor rehabilitation projects, information technology, and other identified projects, which will be financed over a 25-year period. The issuance of the 2021 bonds complies with the authority's debt policy. The authority has a AAA rating from Standard & Poor's, which is the highest rating you can achieve, AA2 by Moody's, and AA from Fitch. And for this financing, similar to the last financing that the authority did, we'll be going only for Standard & Poor's rating and not Moody's or Fitch. Next slide, please. This provides the debt service schedule of the two proposed financing, breaking it down into the basic needs and the special projects. As mentioned, those projects will be financed over a 12-year period. So after 12 years, the debt service will decline. I would just like to note one correction, that the final maturity on the special needs projects, if you will be 2046 instead of 2047, which was 25 and a half years. So it'll be 46, which will be 24 and a half years to make sure that it is under the 25-year final limitation. Next slide, please. The debt is structured to take advantage of the authority's rapidly declining debt service and to keep your existing debt service pretty level to where it currently is. Even as you add in this new debt service, you'll see in the dark graph that is your existing existing senior lien debt service. The light blue is your existing subordinate lien, and the other colors are the new financing. You'll see how that's layered in. Even with this financing, the authority still has a very, very attractive debt profile with the very quickly declining debt service. Next slide. So we are scheduled to meet with the rating agency Standard & Poor's the week of September 6th. We'll be coming back before this board to approve the resolution, authorize the sale of the bonds. We look to be in the market on September 30th. JP Morgan and Wells Fargo will act as the underwriters on the transaction. And then the closing is scheduled for October 28th, and that is when funds will be available for the authority to expend on the projects. We have a couple of slides on the market. As I'm sure most are aware, there is an infrastructure plan that is working its way through Congress in the amount of 1.2 trillion. In addition, there's another potential stimulus program in the amount of about 3.5 trillion. I think from the authority standpoint, understanding the impact of this on both infrastructure and inflation is important, because it is pushing a lot of money into the market. We've seen some fairly high inflationary numbers coming out. But with that said, their interest rates still are at their near all-time historical lows. If you go to the next slide, please. Of course, we all know we're dealing with the resurgent of the coronavirus and the Delta variant specifically, and sort of understanding how that's going to impact the economy is still an unknown. Next slide. However, when you look at what interest rates have done over the last year and going back over the last 10 years, we're still at almost the all-time historical lows, which were hit in August of last year. And so we fully expect that the authority will be able to lock in very attractive interest rates given the interest rate market environment we're in. There is still tremendous demand for municipal bonds, especially high-rated bonds like the authorities. That brings me to the conclusion of my presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Harrigan. Do we have any questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I can't see everybody right. Oh, everybody's coming back. Yes, Councilor Davis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Harrigan, I always learn something new because I did not go to school for finance, as my bank account shows. But I learned something new every day. First time I've ever seen something called a special needs bond. So can you tell me what that is? And the rate's a little higher. I'm just curious because I haven't seen it and it helps me understand better.
Sure, absolutely. So the authority has can finance projects either over a 12-year or up to 25-year. What we call general projects or basic needs projects are financed over a 12-year period. Any type of project that falls outside of the sort of basic needs or general projects, similar to the diversion project, can be financed up to 25 years. So that's how we break it out sort of internally for us. So.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, if I can have one other.
Yes, go ahead.
Maybe Mr. Sanchez or some of our staff. Is there anything that we're proposing to pay for in this bond that's outside of sort of our capital plan that we've been planning on in the past? I see a number of projects listed and I had a chance to look through the thing, but is there anything unusual here? Or is this pretty standard for our capital plan that we've approved over the last few years?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Davis, this would all be consistent with our decade plan and the projects listed in there.
All right. Okay, great. Any more questions, comments? All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Harrigan. We appreciate the presentation. We'll move on to item 8, which is the consent agenda. These we'll be voting on. So this will be 8A, C21-15, the fiscal year 2021 annual inventory certification. So I will move for approval of item 8A. Do I have a second? I have a second by Commissioner Benson. Do we have any comments? Any questions? No? Okay. So Ms. Carrion, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Chairman, normally you approve the consent agenda and all items with one.
So you want me to do them all in one whack? Okay, that's fine.
Correct.
And then we'll also approve item C 2116, which is to reappoint to the Technical Customer Advisory Committee. So I guess we've got to approve that we're going to do that in the consent agenda. So I will move to approve all consent agenda items. And I guess we'll stick with Commissioner Benson on the second. And Ms. Carrion, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Benson?
Aye.
Councilor Davis? Councilor Jones?
Yes.
Member Nair?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pena?
Yes.
Commissioner Piscotti?
Yes.
Chair Quesada?
Yes,
That passes unanimously.
thank you. We'll move on to item 9A, which is R2115, the fiscal 2021 unaudited fourth quarter financial report, year ending in June 30th, 2021. Mr. Alared.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this is the fourth quarter unaudited financial status. We had our entrance conference this morning with Chairman Calzada, with the external auditors, and that audit is in progress. And once that report's done, we'll present that to the board. On this slide is the total revenues. It's about $2.9 million above what we budgeted and $1 million less than last year. But we were still above our budget amount, still had fairly good consumption levels. They kind of dropped off this summer a little bit, especially in July, as it got hotter and as the drought intensified. Our customers really reacted to the drought, and their consumption levels have reduced over the last couple of months. Next slide, please. This is our year-to-date operating expenses. It's increased about $5 to $7 million above last year. And with that increase, it ate some of our working capital balance, but because we used some of our working capital balance to offset those expenditures without imposing a rate increase on our customers during the pandemic. Next slide, please. This is our operating expenses by month. You can see pretty much every month we were if you straight line our expenditures, we were at or below what we intended to spend per the budget. And again, therefore we had the savings. The increase really in July is that's the month we pay most of our debt service. So there's a huge debt service payment in July, and July will always be fairly large. Next slide, please. Our days cash on hand, we're still above 400 days. We're about 405 days, so we've maintained our days cash on hand. It has began to drop, and we discussed that while we did the budget, and therefore there may be a need for a rate increase on the next year budget cycle. But we're really working hard in controlling our expenditures with a lot of just working smarter and efficiencies throughout things we do. Next slide, please. Year-to-date capital expenses. Here you'll see a spike. This year we really caught up on a lot of the projects that we had appropriated and had put into play to begin designing and building. A lot of those projects came to fruition, to a conclusion in FY21. So therefore you see a lot of expenditures. So in the prior years, we may not have spent as much as what we had and what we appropriated, but we were doing those projects, and a lot of those projects, as I said before, came to fruition in FY21, and we put a lot of assets into use during this fiscal year. Next slide, please. Our debt coverage, we're still well above the 1.33 for senior lien. Our senior subordinate level is 1.2, and we're well above that. We're at about 1.89 on our senior lien. Again, it's beginning to drop. So therefore, the need at some point in time to adjust revenues to compensate for that. Water use production, you can kind of see that in FY21, our use was at or almost below the prior years. We kind of had a little spike in April and May, and then we kind of came back down, as I said, in June. And we had looked at July coming up for next fiscal year. We're well below July's in the prior year. So as the drought has reared its ugly head, our customers really have done a good job in conserving and tapering their water usage. Next slide. The same kind of dictation. So production is what we actually pumped from the river out of the aquifer. The consumption is what we've actually sold to our customers. Again, that line even shows it less. Those levels have dropped, and I think our customer base has, or our ratepayers have done a really good job during the drought. And the utility has done its best to compensate and lower expenditures during that time frame as well, to compensate for maybe any potential reductions in revenue. Plus, we were able to use a very large rate reserve fund to compensate for any differences. And then the last slide is this precipitation. Again, starting in June, you can kind of see we start pumping a lot more water. Precipitation really dropped off during the last half of the fiscal year, started increasing in June. Had a lot of consumption, or a lot of rain, I'm sorry, in July. And you probably would see, we had July on here, that you would see the production levels actually dropping what we pumped from the wells and from the drinking water plant. And that concludes my presentation, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. What accounted for the increase in expenses from FY21?
The large amount of the increase was increase in the transfer to CIP. As you remember, the board has approved that we increase the transfer of cash by $3 million a year. So we had a $3 million increase for that. And then we had an increase of about $5 million for debt service. But as of the end of the before the last close, we are $4.3 million under budget for the year in total expenditures. So basically, we pretty much offset the increase in expenditures with savings from operations.
Okay. What is the ending fund balance for FY21? And does it include any amounts mandated by the rate ordinance?
The ending fund balance for FY21 was 54.9 million. At the end of FY20 or FY20, at the end of FY21, it's 47.9 million. That's made up of $9 million for the rate reserve fund as mandated by the rate ordinance and the board. The board also approved $500,000 for a risk reserve fund, and that's fully funded. And then $1.5 million for the soils amendment facility, which we talked about last year, and that's fully funded. And the remaining is just fund balance, and that amounts about $36 million.
Okay.
So that's the balance above revenues above expenditures.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. Any more questions? Yes, Commissioner Benson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Allred, unless I'm reading it incorrectly, which may have been the case, in your slides, it looked like revenue was much higher in 2018. But then in a later slide, it looked like consumption, it didn't stand out like the revenue did. So can you explain, if that's true, what drove the revenue up so high in 2018?
Well, FY18, we had a rate increase. So there was a 5% rate increase. Consumption went up a little bit. When we hit FY19, consumption levels went down. So you didn't really see that in FY19. FY20, the consumption levels, people just started using a little bit less. So we've seen the spike in 18 because that was the rate increase and consumption was a little higher. 19, it dropped off. 20 and 21 has been pretty consistent with each other, so that was better than FY19.
Okay,
and we hadn't had a rate increase since FY19.
Gotcha. So in 2018, the rates increased, which
Sure.
explains the spike.
Correct.
And then consumers decreased their supply, which offset the rate increase for revenue, correct?
That is correct, Commissioner Benson.
Okay. Thank you. Also, Mr. Allred, you said that we might be looking at a potential rate increase for next year. Is that true?
As Mr. or Commissioner Benson and Mr. Chairman, as we mentioned in the budget presentation that we had in the finance plan, that we may possibly have a rate increase. It's just we're at a level now where expenditures are increasing, and the amount of revenues dedicated for debt service is decreasing. And we just want to make sure that we maintain a proper level to maintain our debt, our ratings, the AAA rating we get from, but we'll do our best. And we have every year. We haven't had a rate increase over the last 3 years, and we had anticipated doing them every other year. But we have not had one for 3 years. We've really worked hard through that, creating efficiencies within the utility with the expenditures and doing some creative, not creative, but really smart financing and trying to get some grants from the state to fund a lot of things. So we will continue to do that, but there might be a potential to need to have one. And I just, as we said in the budget, just threw that out there. But as I said, we're starting to decrease our working capital balance. It reduced by $7 million this year. Our customers have been using less water because of the drought, so it may be a strain on revenues at that point as well. But we'll do our best, and if we have to have one, then that's because we absolutely have to have one. We won't have one just to have one.
Gotcha. So what tools do we have to avoid a rate increase? My assumption is that when the rates increase, people decrease their water usage because of the rate increase. Like it's a penalty, right? And so, how can we, avoid that? There's other tools, but I'm new to this process.
Our rate consultant, she's been with us probably as long as I've been here, so at least 20 plus years. And she's with a company called Stantec. And part of the way they do the rating out, and we do this every 2 years, and we did it this year just because we want to make sure our rates stay equitable. So we have, our rates are based on cost of service. They're really driven based on what it costs us to provide service. So she looks at that, and inside that model is and she's an economist. Inside that model is what's called the rate impact model. And basically that model dictates what we think based on past rate increases, how our customers are going to react to a rate increase. So we can kind of model what we think the consumption levels may or may not be, and what level of a rate increase we really need. So what I try to do is I increase the revenue by 5% on the finance plan and say we need this much revenue to cover our expenditures. And then she plugs everything into a rate model, and she does analyze what she thinks our customers will use and not use and how they react to a rate increase. I will say this is that our rates are by far the lowest rates in the Southwest. If you compare our rates to everybody else, it's the city of Rio Rancho. I was just talking to my son-in-law, he lives up there. They pay $10 a unit for sewer. We pay about $2 a unit for sewer, or a little bit less than $2. So we do look at other utilities in the Southwest. We're by far the least expensive in the state of New Mexico, but by far some of the least expensive in the whole Southwest. As Mark would always say, we also have purchased a water for the next 100 years through the drinking water plant. So we've got that expenditure behind us, and so.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I wonder if our population were to grow, then we would have more users. in the water system, which would increase the consumption, which would increase the revenue, right? So, do you anticipate much growth in terms of new families moving here? Because I know that's been an issue in the newspapers.
Commissioner Benson and Mr. Chairman, we usually do that. In the finance plan, I've left growth almost completely flat. When the
Okay.
market dropped, we were growing before the market dropped, we were growing about 5% a year. So we took that in account on our revenue when we needed increases or not. Now, one thing that might play a role a little bit is we need to look at is the effect of Intel using water and the effect that will have on the revenue as well. As we did the budget, we never took that into account. That is something that my staff will take into account before we do any kind of rate increase, because that'll obviously have an impact to our revenue stream.
Great.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Benson, if I could add a couple of points. Some of our biggest expenditures that are uncontrollable tend to be power and chemicals. So one of the things we've been doing, back to your tools question, is adding solar. So we're now producing almost 10 megawatts of solar that we didn't have previously. So that's reducing or at least mitigating future increases in power cost. We're consistently analyzing our chemical usage and trying to mitigate those costs. And during Mr. Harrigan's presentation, you saw our debt portfolio going down substantially in 2026. So I think the challenge for us is getting to that point, and I think we're going to be in a really good position from that point forward.
Yeah, the 2026 looks like a finish line almost. It looks exciting.
Right. And then I would add, though, however, we're in a unique position in that we're trying to push revenue down by encouraging conservation. So when we consume less water, we produce less revenue, and that creates challenges.
I mean,
That's an
one good
interesting
example.
paradox. Yeah.
One good example just recently is we looked at how we control the alkalinity level in our sewer and our interceptors going to the wastewater plant. We've decreased the alkalinity in those lines, which has mitigated the need for odor because it's reduced the odor naturally. And we have saved this year $1 million in chemical costs by making that change in our sewer lines. And so that's a massive, I mean, just being smart about what we do, we've actually saved over $1 million in chemicals costs for odor control in the sewer lines. And it's working like a charm. So.
It's great. Well, my hat's off to the Water Authority for keeping rates so low. And I want to encourage decreased consumption as well, without discouraging increased population. But also, I don't want to see rates rise if we don't have to. I know you don't either. So, Mr. Allred and Mr. Sanchez, you obviously are very familiar with all the tools at your disposal, while I'm not. And so I'm satisfied with the direction that you're moving in. And hopefully we don't have to raise rates, because it still hits everybody's pocketbooks. And so that's just my 2 cents. But thank you, Mr. Allred. Appreciate your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Benson. Just since we're kind of on the subject, how is the infrastructure bill? Because I know that also affects, the water for the new money coming in. Will that affect, the water utility authority? Do you expect in getting, some of that funding, and will that also offset some of the costs? Do you know any of that yet?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we're really not certain as to what benefit or funding we will receive from that. Much of the emphasis appears to be to replace lead and copper lines across the country. And we do not have that problem, fortunately. So we're not going to get that money. Hopefully it'll trickle down and where we can do some special projects that perhaps we had planned in the future.
Yeah, some
Yeah,
of those
really
infrastructure
important.
things, yeah.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Thank you, everybody. Look, I'm going to move. Do I have any more comments? Any more questions? Okay, good. I'm going to move for approval of R21-15. Do I have a second? Second by Commissioner Benson. Ms. Carrion, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Commissioner Benson?
Aye.
Counselor Davis?
Yes.
Counselor Jones?
Yes.
Member Nair?
Yes.
Vice Chair Peña?
Yes.
Commissioner Piscotti?
Yes.
Chair Quesada?
Yes.
Passes unanimously.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll move on to item, excuse me, I'm losing my number here. It's 9B, which is C-21-17, approving contract with the Environmental Systems Research Institute, Inc. for ArcGIS software and license. Cody Stinson to present us.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Before you is a recommended approval for renewing and extending our partnership with Esri, which is the vendor that we use for tracking all of our GIS assets, which is all of our linear and underground assets. So I recommend approval for this particular contract.
All right. Councilor Davis and then Councilor Peña.
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Go ahead.
Councilor Peña.
I was just seconding.
Oh, okay. So that's a motion to approve and a second. So a motion by Councilor Davis, a second by Councilor Peña. Ms. Carrion, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Benson? Counselor Davis?
Yes.
Counselor Jones?
Yes.
Member Nair?
Yes.
Vice Chair Peña?
Yes.
Commissioner Piscotti?
Yes.
Chair Quesada?
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move on to item
Thank
C, which is C-21-18, approving a service connection agreement for water and sewer service with Novus Properties LLC at 4588 Nunzio Avenue Northwest. Miss Chris Cadena.
Bless you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, my name is Christopher Cadena. I manage the Utility Development Section at the Water Authority, and I present to you a service connection agreement for Novus Properties LLC. And what they're proposing to do is have a 3-lot commercial subdivision near Paradise and Paseo del Norte. The property is zoned for commercial, and all they really have to do is connect to existing infrastructure. But being that the property is outside the Water Authority's adopted service area, it needs board approval. And the development will be required to pay utility expansion charges and water resource charges. And I stand for any questions.
Do we have any questions? No, I move for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, Councilor Peña. Ms. Carron, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, sir. Counselor Benson? That was an aye. Counselor Davis? Counselor Jones?
Yes.
Member Nair?
Yes.
Vice Chair Peña?
Yes.
Commissioner Piscotti?
Yes.
Chair Quesada?
Yes,
That passes unanimously.
thank you so much. We will move on to item 10, which is other business. Item 10A, which is OB 21-13, is the drought report by Mr. Carlos Bustos.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Next slide, please. I'll be updating on the drought and also talking about some drought measures. Last time I presented to the board, 70%, 77% of New Mexico, you can see in the map on the right on June 8th, was facing extreme to exceptional drought conditions. Since then, parts of New Mexico have received above monsoon rainfalls, and here in Albuquerque, we've had a little over 3 inches this summer season. June and July have been wet months, and much of central and parts of southeast New Mexico received 300 to 500% of their normal rain. The rest of the state was mostly above normal for those 2 months, with near to normal in northwest and southwest. And you can see the significant change in the map I'm presenting on the left on August 3rd. Conditions statewide have improved, and the drought monitor map shows that now only about 40% of the state is within extreme or exceptional conditions. Here in the county, we're barely experiencing exceptional drought conditions. So things are improving. Next slide, please. At least for here in New Mexico, things are improving, but if we zoom out, the story for other states in the region is a bit grimmer. Parts of Arizona have received so much rain this season that it has caused major floods, and in California, they experienced this year one of the biggest, I think the second biggest fire in their history. As of today, still 89% of the entire western region is experiencing drought conditions. The drought is far-reaching, and that's why it's considered to be one of the worst drought to date, because as you can see in the map, is going all the way to Washington State and even to parts of the Great Lakes. So locally, the monsoon season is alleviating the situation. You can see that in our maps. Some areas, the drought remains, but it's improving. And some areas where the New Mexico Drought Monitoring Group is looking at removing drought conditions. Nevertheless, we gotta wait to see what happens this winter season in regards to drought. I don't anticipate that we're going to be 100% out of the drought conditions for the rest of the year. Next slide, please. We continue to be in drought stage 1, which means we continue with added public messaging. We have about 24 billboards, commercials, radio. Occasionally, we do news releases to alert customers of things they can do. We're doing bill inserts. And we're offering the Drought Smart classes with $20 rebate, and our Waterways compliance fees are double. All these measures are intended to curb demand during the summer season. So in my next slide, I'm going to be showing you the difference in water usage this summer. Next slide. Looks like it's working, the drought measures. I'm showing summer water production from May 1st to July 31st for 5 years, 2013, 2015, 2018, 6 years, 2019, 2020, and 2021. The blue means it was a wet year, normal to above, and then the red means we were some sort of drought declaration or advisory. And notice that 2021 summer season demand is much lower than previous droughts and more like wetter years, even while we face one of the worst droughts. Albuquerque is responding to the action call. As Stan mentioned, demand is about 600 million gallons less for the same period between May 1st and July 31st compared to 2020. Our daily average demand has dropped as well. In the first week of July, our latest peak day reached 142 million gallons. And since then, our average gallon per day has dropped to about 110 million gallons per day. So that's a 30 million gallon drop during the peak of the irrigation season. Our current GPCD or per capita is about 126. That's 2 GPCD below what we ended last calendar year. So again, that's another indicator that customers are responding to not only the action call and the public messaging and the drought measures that we put in place, but also responding to the education that we've been doing for the last 20 years and alerting customers to not water when it rains. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about the Drought Water Measure Rebate Water Smart class. And if you haven't signed up, I encourage you to sign up and learn about the 3 steps to landscape success, which are service, settings, and selection. You can visit this link. We're offering 5 more classes this fall season, and so far they've been a success. As you may know, residential customers, they average monthly summer is more than 2 times in the than in the winter. It's about 40% of their total annual use. And because of that, we're focusing on the different practices that take place when you're watering a landscape. Next slide, please. So first, we cover the importance of maintaining your irrigation system to avoid waterways and how to update and improve efficiency. Performing survey checks, going over an irrigation maintenance checklist. We have that checklist available for folks. And also, this section covers the importance of checking for leaks and clogged parts, and ensuring that your spray heads are not pointing in the wrong direction. Then we cover smart watering practice, how to water using a hose, how to water using spray irrigation, how to water using drip for various types of plants. And then we offer advice on the importance of understanding your yard before you choose a plant. And so it's a really good topic on plant selection, but also plant location and knowing where to plant your new plant and put it in the right place. So it thrives. So by teaching people how to water effectively using a hose, a sprinkler, or a drip, teaching them how to identify and correct issues with irrigation systems, and helping them with selecting the right plants, the average participant is saving about 15% per house. In total, this program, with the 21 classes that we provided and more than 800 participants, they have conserved 1.6 million gallons to date. The second drought measure that I wanted to talk about is about the doubling of the waterways fees. Although this may look like a river and a beautiful sight, this is waterways identified by our team this year. Waterways is defined as any non-beneficial use of water. By ordinance, the Water Authority can levy fees against properties who are observed wasting water. On any given year, we deal with fugitive water issues from sites such as irrigation, but also cooling systems. And our main issues are malfunctions, and those seem to be a high priority. The one earlier that Floyd was showing was discovered in a valve box, and that was losing on an average about 75 gallons per hour. Next slide. This one we jokingly refer as urban geysers. We find them a lot, and they tend to lose about 225 gallons of water per runtime, and up to 50,000 gallons in one entire season if not fixed. That's more than enough to supply a home of efficient water users for an entire year. It's one spray body. Next, please. This happens as a result of overwatering. We see this a lot. This issue happens every time, every runtime for the entire season, and up to 60% of the water is wasted to the pavement. Next one. Under the waterways, our current waterways reduction ordinance, we keep up the activity for enforcement, but we have another approach where we do report it and observe warning notices before we issue a violation. This year, I personally have been intervening and talking to customers before we issue a violation, and because of that, we reduced some of the violations that we couldn't send. we've received about 300 or 400 complaints this year. Next slide. And as you can see, those complaints, they resulted from in 387 warnings, 336 malfunction inspections, and 23 violations issued. Only 2 residential, the rest are commercial. For calculating savings as a result of waterways, we factor in the previous year. We noted the date of the interaction, and then we looked at what happened after. And as a result, we're seeing that for each interaction, customers are saving 16%, which is good. It means they're fixing their issue. And for all those interactions this year, we've saved 30.4 million gallons. If left unnoticed, this waterways would probably result in a lot more gallons lost. And I stand for question.
Thank you, Mr. Bustos. I have a couple of questions. How does this drought compare from the 2011, 2013 drought?
It's somewhat similar with the patterns that we're seeing in 2013 to 2021 with the monsoon season. But as you saw regionally, this drought is a lot more grimmer. It's more extensive. Here in New Mexico, it was, I think, only the 4th time that the state has experienced exceptional and extreme conditions for more than 70% of the entire state area. So the conditions today are somewhat similar, but definitely the snowpack that we've experienced in the last 2 years is a lot less than what we had in 2011, 2012, and 13.
Okay. So I'm going to ask, are the water savings response to the good monsoon season we've experienced this summer?
It's a response to the public messaging and the work that David Morris has been doing with increasing public education and making sure that we put out the word that whenever it rains, don't water when it rains, and make sure you're taking advantage. We've seen an increase in rainwater harvesting rebates this year. That always happens whenever we see a lot of rain. A customer hit us up the other day doing a shout out because they saved 1,500 gallons by having 1 rain barrel. So it's good to hear those things. And definitely we're seeing as a result of a response to the monsoon season.
Great. I water with a hose, so because you talked about you're continuing the classes, but I water with a hose. Should I not be watering with a hose, or is there a right way to water with a hose? I know you probably teach that in the class, but I mean for a lot of people who don't have time to take the class,
Yeah.
Can you kind of respond to at least that?
A quick tip.
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Chair and members of the board, yes. So if you water with a hose, the tips we're providing is how much to water per plant. So if you got a tree, right now in August, you want to be watering at least 1 time a week, and you want to make sure that you're watering that tree for at least 40 minutes around the tree using the hose. Don't water the trunk. Just make sure you're watering around the tree canopy to make sure you're feeding those roots deep enough. That's roughly about 200 gallons.
Wow. Okay.
And we
All right,
offer those sort of tips in the class.
I've been doing it wrong. I've been watering the trunk, and so I have a struggling tree, and so I'm trying to save my tree, and so maybe that's probably why I have one. And they're new trees. We just planted them a couple of years ago. They're about 10 years old, so they're not rather big, but I have one that he's not looking happy. So I thought I would ask you since we were going to have this meeting, and maybe there's more people out there who's having the same problem. Are you guys going to start changing your messaging on watering as we move into the fall? Is there going to be a new message coming out for consumers?
Yes. So this fall season, we're hitting hard on ramping down, which means that you need less water in the fall season that you need in the summer. So we're making a final push to reduce our water usage even more this fall season. I know it doesn't tie in good with the revenue and rate conversation, but we're making that push. That's what we do, and folks are responding. And as part of, I wanted to remind Mr. Chair that we do offer free irrigation consultations. So if you're interested on one, we can send a staff and we can custom make a water budget based on your landscape and make sure that those trees are happy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's awesome. And my last question is, have we seen an increase in waterways complaints this year? Have we seen an increase in that?
Yes, we looked at previous years, previous drought years, and this year we decided to do 2 bill inserts, and because of that, we ended up with a lot more cases that we could handle at the beginning. We're already we cashed up, but we definitely had a surge in complaints this year because of those bill inserts and talking about the drought. So yes, Mr. Chair.
And the reason why I ask that is, I find myself when I drive around, if I see water running down the curb, right away I start freaking out. I'm thinking, someone's either wasting water or there's a break and I think we talked about it last time, sometimes the air conditioner float isn't working correctly and water's just rolling down the street. So I know that a lot of us are more aware, through the drought season. So thanks for asking that question. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Bustos? Yes, Ms. Nair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions. First of all, thank you, Mr. Cadena. We always learn a lot from your presentations, especially about the power of education. And I'm not sure if these are for you or for Director Sanchez, but my first one is regarding the Tohajali water system. We've been reading a lot about that as the drought deepens, and I know that the Water Utility Authority just has a small piece of that big puzzle, but if there's any update you could provide to the board and the public, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Board Member Nair. If you recall, the board authorized us delivering water provided by the Navajo Nation through a conveyance line to the Tohajali chapter. On their behalf, we applied for funding with the State Water Trust Board. They allocated about 7.9 million for the conveyance structure. However, 3 million of that was approved as a loan. The problem with that is 2,000 residents of Tohajali cannot pay back a $3 million loan. So we've requested that the Water Trust Board reconsider the loan component and make it all a grant and consider the almost 4 million that's been expended for the project on the Tohajali side as the match they were seeking to create through the loan. We've yet to hear from them. The design is almost done, so we're ready to begin construction as soon as we hear about that. That's the latest.
Thank you, Director Sanchez and Mr. Chair. If I might, if there's a form of letter of support that maybe you could send out to the board members and we could decide whether we wanted to send that in our own capacities for your proposition that loan be converted to a grant, I would really appreciate it.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, if I might, one more. We received some notices today that the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District was moving to the Prior and Paramount irrigation system, and just wondering whether that has any impact on the Water Utility Authority and our customers.
Mr. Chair, Board Member Nair, it does not. However, it does tend to provide less water in the river, and that's noticeable. So it gets conveyed through the canals and ditches.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Any more questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Board Member Nair. So we will move on to item 10B, which is OB 2114. Water Authority Data Gap Groundwater Monitoring Well for the Kirtland Air Force Base Bulk Fuels Facility Project. Diane Agnew.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you again about the Kirtland Air Force Base Bulk Fuels Facility project. As Liz mentioned earlier, this presentation is primarily talking about the data gap well that we have received capital outlay funding for, but we'll touch on just a very brief project update anyhow. The status of the site. This is a graphic I borrowed from a presentation that the Nmed gave to this board in November 2020, and it is a nice, succinct summary of the corrective action process, which is what the BFF project has to follow by regulation. And it breaks it into two halves, and I believe most of you are all familiar with this, but you have the characterization, really the defining what is out there, where is the contamination and what is the contamination. And then the corrective measures component, which is really implementing the treatment to go after that contamination. And the project has been kind of hanging out in this RFI, the site characterization phase. That is where it is today. The Air Force last submitted a document to talk about site characterization in 2017. They rebranded it as a phase 1. The NMED, the State Environment Department, said, hey, we have comments on this phase 1, and you're going to need to submit a phase 2. And the approval of both of those documents is required before they can step into corrective measures evaluation that's shown in this graphic, basically reviewing what can happen for treatment and making a selection. So we're still in that phase. No matter what the map looks like, we're still in that phase. The NMED has to resolve their outstanding comments and concerns on the project, and it has to be approved. This phase 2 report has to be submitted, and they both have to be approved before we can even begin the corrective measures evaluation. The other thing I'd say about this process is that the RFI, that site characterization green box, and this corrective measures light green box, those can both address any missing data for the site. So there's the ability to keep making progress while still addressing concerns. The biggest thing is that before we get to that remedy selection that you see in that white box, we need to make sure that the site is fully understood so that contamination can be completely cleaned up. I've presented to the board before, and we've talked about these technical working groups. They've happened in the past. They have been really integral to progress at the site. We've had 2 productive planning meetings with the Air Force and NMED. There will be another planning meeting in September. I'm hoping at that meeting we can really finalize the rules of engagement for the working group and put some dates on the calendar so I can come to the board and say, yes, we're meeting on these dates and here are the topics we're going to discuss. The only remediation happening at the site right now is the groundwater pump and treat. That is a remediation technology meant to go for EDB in groundwater. Otherwise, there's no active remediation occurring at the site. That's important because when pump and treat was selected by the technical working group, it was understood that it could not be done without source treatment happening at the same time. And when I say source, I mean remaining fuel in the ground closer to where the leak happened. And then the site monitoring is ongoing. They are primarily using what's called a passive sampling method. And we most recently responded to a letter from the Air Force requesting that they cease groundwater modeling that they were doing to evaluate the performance of the pump and treat system. Next slide, please. The concerns that we have presented to the board before, much of them remain. One of them being, where does the fuel remain in the soil and groundwater? This is something that's really critical. If we don't understand this well enough, the final remedy could be insufficient for treating the site contamination and could result in persisting groundwater contamination. And then another concern that we've discussed quite a bit is the location of the ethylene dibromide, known with sufficient certainty that we feel like the remedy can be adequately designed and protective. And also that in that interim period that we aren't seeing migration of EDB that isn't being detected by the monitoring program. Another key point is that the maps that are presented by the Air Force and also, consequently the NMED, it's not showing Graphically, all of the ethylene dibromide and benzene at the site is only showing those concentrations that are above the maximum contaminant level, which is the EPA level of what they consider to be safe. And the Water Authority's position is that no contamination is acceptable for our customers. And there's a really important reason for this. MCLs can change over time. We don't want to be basing site cleanup on this MCL, and that we don't want our customers to have to drink any amount of contamination. So we feel like these maps may not be graphically illustrating the true status of the site and where contamination exists. And then, as I mentioned, there's only remediation at the site is a pump and treat system that is looking at the groundwater contamination with ethylene dibromide, and nothing's happening in the source area. And again, if that fuel stays there, you continue to see it in groundwater over time. Next slide. So to dive into the specifics for this presentation is to talk about our data gap well. And really high level groundwater monitoring is it's an important tool for contamination sites. It's a way of kind of taking the temperature, checking the stats of the site. And it can be informative in simply just telling us where the water level is. As you all know, the water level in the Albuquerque area has been rising since we brought on the San Juan Chalma drinking water project. So these wells are really important for being able to monitor that and see how the recovery is working. We can do water quality. We can take a sample. We can understand where contamination is. It can tell us just general information about the water chemistry that's informative. And we can tell a lot about the movement of contaminants. And then these wells are actually really great in that they provide us a view into the ground that we can't get from simply standing on it. So as these wells are drilled, we can get information about the hydrogeology. How big are the pores? Does it look like a sandbox? Or does it look like the gravel that you might have in your front yard? And those are key elements of the aquifer because they tell us more information about how water is moving and how the contaminants may be moving as well. And then all of that can get fed into the black box machine that is groundwater modeling. And that's like our weather prediction tool that helps us fill in the gaps because it's obviously not possible to completely understand what's happening 500 feet below us. So we need to make sure that we use these modeling tools verified with data. So trust but verify approach. Next slide, please. At the bulk fuels facility, the Air Force has been monitoring ADB. They also do benzene, toluene, xylenes. Those are key contaminants associated with fuel. The depth of these wells has varied across the site. So an interesting thing for these wells is that though the water table has been consistently rising since 2008, these wells have not all been designed to accommodate that rising water level until very recently, like in 2020. So it becomes a fairly complex monitoring picture when you think about wells, what they used to measure, what they're measuring today, and how what part of the aquifer they're now representing. The other thing that is important about this is that the site is not sufficiently being characterized, and that's for several compounding factors, one of them being the rising water table, some of that being a change in how they're sampling these wells. And again, not to hit this too hard, but we need to understand where this contamination is so that we have a robust remediation. We don't find out that we've missed contamination, it's continuing to migrate, or we see increasing concentrations after the Air Force has cleared that final remedy hurdle. Next slide. We're going to go underground a little bit here. This graphic is technical, but I feel like it's a nice picture to hopefully explain what the data gap well is going to do. This is as if you could take a slice of pie out of the aquifer at the ethylene dibromide site for the BFF project. And all of these like yellows and reds are not really important to look at. What is important are these green arrows. And the gray slivers in here represent clay. Clays are very limiting in how water can move, but more importantly, how contaminants can move. Contaminants are like fatter molecules than water, so they tend to get stuck in the clay, whereas water can move through it. And the yellow in here is sand. So we're talking about like the difference between the clay that you might see that like your clay pots are made out, clay pottery is made out of, or adobe bricks versus sand in a sandbox. And if you can imagine, fat little particles of contaminants can move more easily through a sandbox and they may be able to move across a clay pot. When the Air Force put wells out here, we had detections of ethylene dibromide deeper into the aquifer. And those 2 wells had consistent measurements of EDB. And you can see in this graphic that there are these green arrows and question marks. And so that's just showing you where we would think the EDB would move if it was moving with groundwater. And the question marks indicate places where we are not sure where the EDB is because there's not a well at that point to tell us that information. And critically, there's this red box area, this zone of interest, and that's an area that we identified in the 2017 RFI report that the Air Force submitted that really left this big data gap. Where is the EDB in this zone of the sandbox? Because if it's there, there's no monitoring well to detect it, and it could potentially continue to migrate towards our supply wells. And so in 2018, Water Authority talked to Nmed and the Air Force. We all agreed that a well was needed here. It was put on a map. And then several iterations of work plans later, we still don't have that well in the ground. And that's why we've pursued the capital outlay funding to install this well. Next slide. So what's our plan? This red box is what the area of interest looks like from a map view, from a bird's eye view. And it's a fairly big area, as you can see, because we want to make sure that we work with our contractor to really hone in the exact location, though I anticipate it being on Catherine between Kentucky and Indiana. And there's a lot of other factors in here that will drive where that well goes. There's going to be what the hydrogeologists think is the best place to put this for the contaminant. And then we have to also work with utilities and also minimizing impacts to the residents. For example, we're going to need to position the rig and its drilling support truck such that people can still access their driveways, that they are not blocked out of their homes, for example. We are currently working to contract the consultant to do this work. I anticipate that we will be bringing that to you at the September meeting for your approval. And then we hope to start drilling in October or early November, and that the field work, the disruption to the neighborhoods will be around 6 weeks. And that captures everything from when they first start to pothole to start drilling to the first sample being collected. We will do at least 2 samples out of this initial effort with the consultant, that we intend to continue to monitor this well regularly. This will be our monitoring well. It'll be sampled by Water Authority. We will be posting that data on our website. So we're working on revising a landing page for the Kirtland Air Force Base Bulk Fuels Facility project. It'll have the data gap well project information there, points of contact, the data, any sort of reporting associated with it. Next slide, please. Some things that our customers can expect. This is a neighborhood that I just want to say has endured quite a bit of activity since, as far as I can remember, actually, since at least 2009, 2008. They've had drilling in their neighborhoods, I think, every year since then. And so we will be continuing that, but we, as a result, know how to mitigate impacts to them as much as is possible. So the drilling will be limited to Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So we disrupt the daily routines as little as possible. The total number of drilling days is estimated at 10, so that's really going to be the loudest part of the operations when the machine is clanging pretty loudly. There will be limited street access, but again, we're going to ensure that all of the residents can access their homes and their driveways. We will work with them to make sure their trash and recycling makes it out to where it can be picked up, and that postal service can reach the doorways, the mailboxes without an issue. There will be on-site security at all time, like on all non-drilling times, to ensure the safety of the drill site and also the equipment. And then, like I mentioned, we'll just make sure we maintain access for all of the important things: trash, mail, and emergency access. Next slide, please. And then when we're done, this is what it should look like. It'll be a little new manhole cover. It says monitoring well. And then after the well's installed, it'll just be periodic disruption to the street. We won't have all blocked off, but there'll be a truck parked there for the entirety of a day to collect the samples. I should say that the sampling for this well is planned to follow the exact same analytical methods and laboratory certification that the Air Force is held to. We are really working to follow the same regulatory requirements that the Air Force is held, so our data is directly comparable. But one of the things that we are going to be doing is we're going to sample with low flow sampling because that is the methodology that has been approved for this site. We are also going to do passive sampling so that we can do our own comparison, direct apples to apples comparison with what the Air Force has, and also have our own independent look at how the passive compares to the low flow sampling methodology. And then next slide. And again, as I mentioned, this is a neighborhood that's been impacted for years. We really want to work closely with them to make sure that they are getting information that is accessible to them and also supports their anticipation of the work. And our goal really is to minimize impacts and maximize transparency. We've developed a construction flyer similar to what we do for other construction projects that's specific to this well. We've already started discussions with the Commissioner Barboa, Councilor Davis, since this is their district, to really reach out to them and their constituents to begin the conversations with them so we can have meaningful neighborhood outreach. And as I mentioned, we're working on revamping our website so that all of the information related to this well is readily accessible and that we can be available to answer any questions and concerns. Next slide. And with that, it will stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Agnew, for that presentation. I have a few questions. Has the Water Authority received a response from the NMED or the Air Force regarding its technical concerns of the groundwater monitoring, remaining fuel, and groundwater modeling?
Chair Quesada, unfortunately, we have not received a response to our concerns. Those are two technical memos and a letter, and we're hopeful that those will begin to be discussed in these technical working groups, and that is really the best forum for those comments to be resolved. As they're pretty dang technical, but so far we have not received a response to either of those memos.
Will the MED consider what are they considered to be an acceptable level of groundwater cleaning, and will it be non-detect or something higher than that?
Chair Quesada, excellent question. The Air Force is holding that the cleanup levels will be the MCL, the maximum contaminant level. There is actually the ability in this process to set a cleanup level other than the MCL, and the NMED has not taken a stated position on that. I think that's an area where the Water Authority and its customers can hold discussions and make the position that non-detect would be ideal. But as of right now, and that's actually what the Air Force uses as justification for their maps, is that MCL is the cleanup level that they believe they will be held to, and therefore that's how they communicate all the graphics in the project.
What will happen if EDB is detected in the data gap well?
Chair Quesada, another great question. There will need to be the Water Authority, we're prepared to act swiftly. So if EDB is in that well, we will confirm its detection within, a week or two of getting that initial detection, so that we can take that information to the NMED and the Air Force. Obviously, the right thing to do would have for them to move and put a well into the ground without waiting another 2 or 3 years. So the Water Authority, we've been discussing this and positioning ourselves to take a rapid response and begin discussions immediately with the Air Force and NMED.
What is meant by active remediation of the source area? What does that mean?
They're in the remediation world, they can do pump and treat. There's a variety of mechanical and engineered remediation systems that can go in there and that can begin enhancing mechanisms that are already in place for treating contaminants. For example, pump and treat is a great one where you just pull it out and you filter it and the water's clean. There's also this active in remediation world. There's also this idea of monitored natural attenuation, which is basically letting natural processes degrade contaminants. And so when we say active remediation, we're saying not that. We want to make sure that the final remedy or any remedy at the site is active in reducing the contaminants so that it minimizes how long they persist in the groundwater.
And so what can the water authority do to support the NMED moving forward? I mean, we want to promote accelerated cleanup of the groundwater in the source area. What can we do?
Chair Quesada, members of the board, I think that your support to date has been excellent. And again, I want to thank you for even most recently writing the guest letter editorial column. I think continuing to provide the NMED with our technical resources, we show up in a big way through the development of our database, our technical reviews of the documents and letters, and these technical working groups will be a pretty key tool, I think, for ensuring that we're supporting the NMED in their review process and getting to meeting the concerns, filling the gaps, defining that what the problem is out there, the contamination, and then getting to that remedy as soon as we can, and getting the contamination remediated.
Okay, all right, those are the questions I have. Anybody have, yeah, Councilor Davis?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Excellent questions. I know you have stayed on top of this. And Ms. Agnew, thanks for making time. I do want to acknowledge in front of everybody else, and thank you, sort of mentioned it, but the Water Authority really has done a great job of understanding sort of that this neighborhood in the International District, South San Pedro, and these communities really have, Elder Homestead really have endured, shouldered the burden for the rest of us to be sure our drinking water is clean by dealing with the drilling and the testing, and there's always another well, and there's always another remedy, and always another meeting to attend. And so I do appreciate very much that you and your staff put that community engagement first, and they're going to help us do that, and they're going to endure one more because we know it's important. Really quickly, though, honestly, I have to say, a number of us went to Santa Fe with the new administration a few years ago. I think we found some real allies in this administration at NMED in terms of understanding our challenges and being partners. But it is concerning a little bit that we haven't been able to get a response back from Santa Fe regarding quite frankly, our request to just be sure that they don't move to final remedy before we get a good data sense. And as you said, sort of understanding where it goes, characterizing what this looks like. What do we think that timeline is for NMED to move into the next step, either to respond to us or to start moving into final remedy? I'm really concerned that they're sort of taking that approach, not waiting on us and the legislative appropriated capital outlay to resolve that data question.
Chair Quesada, Councilor Davis, thank you for that question. Last year, when we started seeing a bunch of the letters coming through, we went ahead and updated a timeline for getting to final remedy, and it pushed out to the right quite a bit, just based purely on letters that were from the Air Force communications with the NMED. And we did request a timeline from the NMED and Air Force to say, hey, what do you think is going to be realistic for getting to the corrective measures evaluation? And we have yet to receive that. I will say that it seems like, at least in the recent communications, that seems to be accelerating forward, though it's still not clear to me how they're going to resolve the outstanding concerns in the phase 1 report. They still need to submit this phase 2 report. So it's a little ambiguous to me as well. I think that I'm optimistic that these technical working groups will happen and that we can get through a lot of these memos, the technical concerns that we have. And I'm also optimistic and hopeful that through those discussions, we can really bound what's missing and what needs to be addressed right now as part of the phase 2 RFI, and what can maybe get pushed into that corrective measures evaluation. Because I do think there is some data out here that we could push into the CME, and it would be able to give everyone that momentum to say, okay, now we're in this phase where we're selecting a remedy, and stop feeling like this, we're like slowing down.
Well, Mr. Chair, just to follow, and I'll leave this as my final comment if Ms. Agnew wants to respond, or Mr. Sanchez, but and thank you very much. I think that's right. I mean, I think for now more than a year, almost 2, I think, we, the Water Authority, that means you, because I didn't do it, and I couldn't read those charts if you gave them to me, recognized a gap that said, yeah, maybe we're missing something here, right? And I think they acknowledged that there were some data gaps. I'm just concerned that there seems to be a rush to the achieved banner, right? Like job done, let's all go home banner, because the data will allow that if we don't challenge the data. And let me be clear, I think it's important, and I think it's great that the Water Authority staff and the leadership took on the challenge of saying, we're not just going to press folks to do more. We're going to take on the responsibility of filling the gap, and we're going to use their testing standards and fill that gap. And we've said, if we find that there's no detectable contaminants, then we'll agree and move forward. I think I'm overcharacterizing, but I think that's sort of the point here, right? Is that there's a gap, we're willing to step up and figure it out. I'm just really worried they're moving forward without including that. And at the end of the day, as you mentioned, they're going to leave us and our ratepayers and our drinking water customers with the challenge to clean up whatever they left, because it will be here. So I applaud what you're doing. I want to challenge you and Mr. Sanchez and others to think about to educate us about what are the innovating steps we can do with NMED to ensure that those data gaps get filled and that we get to participate in that before we move to final remedy. Because I think once we cross that threshold, there's a lot of momentum to just call it quits and be done. And that's clearly not, in my opinion, where we are. So thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me make a little speech. But I do think we're doing the right thing, and I would appreciate any opportunity we have to do those intervening steps with NMED to be sure that we're pressing for that need.
No, and that's fine. And those comments need to be, need to be publicly stated. This is huge, and it's been, it's been a long time coming. And you're right. I think we all have that fear of, hey, we're done, bye, and and we don't know that, right? We got to know that that's exactly what happened, because we're responsible to the citizens, and I do have the Kirtland edition too, so that does fall in my district, and so I do have some vested interest in that and making sure that we protect all the residents here. But so I appreciate that. Do we have any more comments on this?
Chair Quesada, Commissioner or Councilor Davis, I just wanted to make one other just follow-on thought to that. Is the most recently when the Air Force was talking about the site, and they keep really hitting on that the monitoring data is robust and it's fine. It's robust and it's fine. And we do have very, in my opinion, critical concerns about the monitoring. And I look forward to that discussion, because I really hope that they bring it to the table and we walk away and we're like, this is great, let's move forward. But the other thing that is important about the process that we're in is if they go to final remedy and they implement it and they find out that it isn't adequate and the contamination is continuing to migrate, and the problem isn't actually being completely addressed, to turn the ship to go back to active characterization and readdressing their final remedy is not trivial. It takes regulatory heavy lifting, because it has to be then what it means is that the whole permit gets flipped on its head. So there's a very compelling reason, not only for the safety of our customers and the drinking water supply, to take action now, but also for the future considerations that this is the window, this is the time where we have the agility and flexibility to make sure we do it right. Much more so than if we wait until the final remedy had been selected. At that point, it takes a lot more work to get it done.
And that's my fear of not responding to our letter. So anyway, does anyone else have any other comments, concerns? No? Thank you so much, Ms. Agnew. That was, that's something that I think is important to everybody on this screen, that is taken care of in a proper way. We'll keep on top of it. We'll make sure that that everybody here is in the loop as we get more information coming in, and hopefully we can get to where we all agree on how to get this done and to do it right. Other than that, that is it. Thank you all for your time. I know your time is very valuable, and I appreciate it very much. And I will now officially make this meeting an adjournment. Thank you all.
A participant has left the meeting.